Not that my symptoms were totally gone, but where I felt like I was in a good, at a good equilibrium there. But definitely the first bit, I'd say the first 2 years, one of the hardest pieces of that was just having been an athlete my whole life, and having that be the way that I managed everything, especially emotionally, mentally, and then kind of having to relearn all of that in a new way.
Hey there, and welcome to the Beckett Johnson podcast, where authenticity reigns supreme. Today, we're delving into the real, raw journey of someone incredibly special to me, my dear friend Cait, a fellow warrior in the battle against brain injury. Our connection runs deep, forged in the fires of a shared struggle and triumph. Brace yourself for a conversation that's as honest as it is inspiring, as we uncover Cait's remarkable path from darkness to light. Cait, welcome to the podcast, my friend. I would like you to possibly share with people how you sustained your injury, and more importantly, when you first realized the impact of your concussion on your journey.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Beckett, for having me here. It's so nice. It feels very full circle in so many ways. Yeah, so I sustained my injury playing college lacrosse my sophomore year, and I got hit with a ball in the face. I broke my nose, had to get stitches, but wasn't initially, my goggles broke in half, but wasn't initially diagnosed with a concussion, which is just wild. And then 2 days later was, up in the night throwing up, called my parents. My dad's like, yeah, you probably have a concussion. And unfortunately was cleared by the trainer to go and fly with my team to Florida for a tournament, which added pressure of that flight kind of sent me into essentially a dark room for two years, because that at the time was the therapy that we were prescribing. Thank goodness that's not the case anymore for so many reasons. But yeah, I got home from Florida and went to my parents' house and lived in their basement for at first, like the first 6 months. I had to take some time off from school, and that's really when I realized that this was a lot bigger than what I initially was expecting. And definitely at that point, I say that I had post-concussion syndrome for 8 years. I think eight years is what it took before I felt like I could just really integrate and be in a way where I could be present in the day-to-day life in a way that felt authentic to me. Not that my symptoms were totally gone, but where I felt like I was at a good equilibrium there. But definitely the first bit, I'd say the first 2 years, one of the hardest pieces of that was just having been an athlete my whole life, and having that be the way that I managed everything, especially emotionally, mentally, and then kind of having to relearn all of that in a new way.
How did they not diagnose you with a concussion right away?
Unbelievable. I literally, Beckett, I remember my coach brought me to the ER. I remember standing there, and I went to a small school in upstate New York. So we're like North Country, like really rural area.
Right.
But I remember standing there, and the nurse is asking me what my home address is, and I can't remember it. And she's looking at me like I'm stupid. I'm like, oh, what is going on? And I didn't even flag it for myself, but yeah, just so wild.
So like you had to go home, get sick, and then go back to the doctor, and then they said you have a concussion?
Yeah, I mean, essentially I went home, was diagnosed with a concussion, but then I was cleared to go to Florida, thinking that I'd be able to play, I'd be better and could play down there. And, it was not.
When did you realize you couldn't play?
Oh, goodness. I mean, all of it was such a blur. And I felt like I felt very siloed in that, I really did believe like, oh, I'll be able to go to Florida in a few days. I'll be fine. Like that's, my face is a little bit of a mess, but I'll be fine. That's what I was told. And so that's what I believed. And and I wasn't.
Oh, the doctors even told you that? They were like, you'll be fine?
The first doctor, I think a lot of the work that I do now with other people suffering from brain injury and concussions and post-concussion is trauma from the medical system. The first doctor I saw, it was a concussion clinic, and they said I had at this point, I guess this was probably not the initial doctor, but when I got back from Florida,
Right.
the first like real concussion doctor I saw, I had debilitating migraines for 2 years pretty much and was very light sensitive. And he looked at me, he's like, so you should just bring a blanket wherever you go. And if you start feeling symptomatic, you can sit under it.
What?
I'm not joking. And I think that that's really interesting. And I learned a lot of this through like meeting you and other brain injury survivors and being part of the Love Your Brain community initially, was how like, with a mild TBI, which is what mine is as a concussion, because mild, moderate, severe is just based on loss of consciousness. It's not what the projection is for the future.
Right.
And like what other injury has a mild, moderate, and severe? Anyway,
Right.
that's a whole other story. But like my mild TBI got put on this track that looks very different than someone, who has a severe TBI, is unconscious in a coma, is put on a very different track. And like a few years later, you might be in the same place symptomatically.
Right.
But the initial treatment and the way that it's viewed is very different. I think we're working collectively. A lot of people are working to change that, especially around the concussion piece. But
do you think it's still like post-concussion syndrome? Do you think I know it's often misunderstood, but what do you think are the biggest misconceptions that people are encountering along that way still?
I think the three hardest parts about post-concussion syndrome, and this might also, I'd be curious what you think, like tracking with someone who's had a severe TBI. It's like, one, just the invisible nature, of course, walking around, and we know you break your leg, people know your leg is broken, they see the cast, they know how they need to support you. There's no questions about, if your leg is broken.
Right. Nobody looks at you and goes, I think that cast is fake.
Exactly.
Right.
And if they do, then there are other things going on in your life. The second is that no two brain injuries are the same. No two concussions are the same, right? I had a doctor once say, you could have a clone of yourself get hit the same way, do the same thing, and they could have completely different response symptomatically to that event. And then third is that there's just no timeline for recovery. So there's because what's the quote? It's like, when you've seen one brain injury, you've seen one brain injury. Have you heard that before? It's like, like, so there's no, you tear your ACL, brutal injury.
Right.
But you have a timeline, what the steps are for recovery, what you need to do after you've recovered in order to continue. And you don't have that with the concussion piece. It's kind of like, because all the invisible symptoms are so different, it forces people to advocate for themselves in a way that's not required in other spaces, which is absolutely exhausting. And I think for a lot of people, and myself included, it becomes a little bit of a head game too. I can't even see this. So how do I parse out what is this injury? What's me comparing to what my baseline was? What's me just stressed out about my symptoms?
And do I even know my baseline?
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think what's shocking about that is, right, you were in lacrosse. I played soccer for 13 years. I never heard of a brain injury. I mean, and you think about it, it's like I was using my head all the time.
Yeah.
To hit the ball, to do, I've watched friends get kicked in the head and get knocked out.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, and brain injury or concussion really wasn't even really brought up ever.
My first retreat with Love Your Brain, 7 years in, Adam Pierce was the first person to look at me and say, Cait, a concussion is a brain injury.
Mm-hmm.
The first person. And of course I look back, I'm like, duh. But it just like, my mind was like, wait, I've been channeled into this like thing. And now like, wow, look at all these resources that are still not enough and too limited. But like, it's just so interesting.
I wonder why that, because it's funny you say that, because when I was at the main retreat, you and I were with there, but Amber was there, and I remember her and I sitting by the lake and her saying the same thing. Well, she had played a sport and she's like, oh, I've suffered like 3 or 4 concussions. And I was the one that looked at her and said, you do understand you've had a brain injury. She's like, no. And I was like, yeah.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh my God. And it kind of like, she's like, that's why I can relate to you guys on so many levels. She's like, I just thought I was, I just understood. I'm like, no, you are one of us.
Yeah. And it's like, I heard the term the other day, like unconscious ableism. Like, and I think that kind of plays into this. It's like, okay, I'm not hurt enough because you can't see my scars, or because I don't have a dramatic story behind it. Like, I can't be hurt enough to put myself in the same box as someone who's gone through that,
Really?
who has that story, who has the scars to prove it.
And it's called unconscious ableism.
Yeah. Just that idea that like, I'm not disabled enough to like, to
claim that,
to claim it. Yeah. And therefore be like, get the help that I need.
Do you think that's why? And I know, like, for instance, I won't obviously mention any names. I just had recently a friend reach out to me. His friend's child, who was 5, was in the grocery cart at Costco. She told him to sit down. He didn't. He fell out. He's now suffered a brain injury. And what they were calling it was a TBI concussion. And now they've upgraded it to full TBI. And I found that interesting because I said, I've never heard anybody call it a TBI concussion. I've heard concussion or I've heard TBI, right? They've always been separated, but now I guess she goes, I don't know. That's what, and he's getting tested, and she just wanted help because she knew nothing about brain injuries, and of course he's 5. So that makes it so much harder. But, I wonder if you have seen, like, are they starting to morph the two together, or are they still keeping them separate?
I think I haven't heard of that one yet, but I like it. That feels like a positive step.
Yeah.
I do know that there's a lot of conversation right now around. First, there's a team that's working on the mild, moderate, severe piece.
Really?
Yep. Because it's literally, that label is based on loss of consciousness, and
that's it.
And that's it. No, it doesn't. It's just, I forget the specifics, but no loss of consciousness is mild. Over 30 minutes is severe. I can't remember. I should know, but I can't remember.
No, that's okay. I'm just blown away that's it. Like that's
it. No, it does not denote any type of what symptoms will look like, what projections are for the future. So there is a team that's working on that. I know there's also a lot of discussion around the term like post-concussion syndrome. And some people are moving towards like persisting concussion symptoms because the syndrome piece has certain connotations so it's just it's interesting. Because I do think language is super important with everything, but especially in the brain injury world, and like the grief and loss world. And so I know that we're starting to question those and develop them, which is progress. And I'll be curious what comes out of that.
Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think part of that too is when you're talking about wording, right? I know in my group, and I know there's some stuff that we learned, like I didn't use the word recovery.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's this connotation with recovery that you're going back to who you were.
Yeah.
And the reality is you never really go back to the person you were.
Yeah.
Right? And so
Mhm.
I think for you, and I know this is something we've all talked about, and some of us are kind of sick of this word, but
Yeah,
resilience,
I
you know
knew
what I mean? We're all like, oh, am I going to hear that again? You know what I mean? But to that point, right?
Mhm.
What role do you think resilience played in your ability to navigate all these challenges, right? And really create a second self?
Mhm. Yeah, I think first of all, I'm extremely fortunate because I have a supportive family and parents who advocated for me, and I'm grateful for that every day. I cannot imagine being in some of those offices without that. Just also with the symptoms I was experiencing. And I'm grateful because I had when I was going to drop out of school, I had an advisor that said, "Wait, give me 3 days to like brainstorm some things." you know, and
Yeah.
came back with like actual possibilities that changed my life. And so there's it's hard for me to imagine going through any of that without that support. And I think like honestly, a lot of because I had been an athlete my whole life, I hadn't gone 2 days without running probably since until my injury. And I think that there was like that routine and structure and the because that because that physical aspect was removed,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I was forced to find new ways to kind of fill those gaps. But my training as an athlete also, I had this like embedded need to find them.
Right.
Like that sense of this is the worst thing ever. And like and what am I gonna do about it? It's like that movement of energy, even though I couldn't do it in the same way, was still like very much embodied in me, if that makes any sense at all.
No, no, it totally makes sense because I think you're right. The point, and I know you and I have talked about that, when
hmm
we met at the brain injury retreat, you were in a much different space,
hmm
which is amazing to see how far you've come. But
hmm
that grief part, did you
hmm
find that hit you really hard? I know for me, it was like year two.
Yeah.
Like year one was like getting used to just my bearings of,
Yep.
right, coming kind of back and physically getting my bearings. And then year two, the emotions really kind of hit and that
Yeah.
depression really hit. Did you
hmm
find that you went through the same thing?
Yeah, it was, and it for me was year two also, and it was after I had a really good 3 months, actually doing a program living in the woods that my advisor pointed me to, which was very healing for me. But when I came back to like day to day life, it was like I got hit all over again. And that point, those are I call them my dark days.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's when that was awful. That was I had imagined a world where I could live with this, and then that felt stripped from me. And that was the time where it was hard to imagine having just to go through the previous 2 years again. Um, yeah.
And what did you do to kind of grab through that?
Honestly, the last 3 months before, I lived in a yurt village in
Talk
the
to me about that. How do
Adirondacks.
you end up going? Like, how does that happen? I would have been so happy if someone said, go live in the woods. I'd been like, yes,
Miracle,
please.
miracle. Like it's not a miracle. It's this advisor I had. She literally, I went to her, I said, I can't do school. I'm going to drop out. She said, give
Right.
me 3 days. She came back 3 days later. She's like, I got you a spot in this program. Don't know if it'll work, but it will take away a lot of the sensitivities that you're telling me about. So like, why not try it?
Right.
And 2 weeks later, I was in a canoe paddling across the lake to this yurt village, and with only one little hiccup, which we can talk about later, which is kind of hilarious. Bad things always come in threes. That's what
Yeah.
my mom always told me. Funny, interesting, not funny at all. Okay, wait, I'm going to tell it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell
The
it.
day before I'm supposed to leave for this, I go to the gynecologist, which I haven't been to, because I've been doing all the brain stuff.
Yeah.
She basically like falls on the floor in our apartment, or in our apartment during our appointment.
I was like, damn, that's a really
Yeah,
personal gynecologist.
no. In our appointment. Turns out I had a 14 centimeter cyst growing in my ovary, the
What?
size of a grapefruit, which had they not found it, they were like, this thing would have popped, cut off your blood supply, you would have died in the woods, like, think
Oh my
again, just
God.
like, but it's so wild. So this was the first time I hadn't worked out before, and I had been just like gaining weight in my belly,
Yeah.
and I was like, this is strange, but like, I guess this is how I gain weight. I just had
Right.
never gone through that process before. And it turns out it was a cyst. And it's so interesting because people are like, the second doctor I saw was like, how did you not know? I was like, you don't understand what I've
Right.
been through the last 2 years. Like, and I still am like, I don't know if I was in pain and just masking it, and I don't know if,
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think that's really common also. And the more research I'm doing around it is the more I'm finding that, after brain injury, a lot of these other things happen to people's bodies.
Really?
And immune systems. Yeah. And like, yeah, it's really interesting. But anyway, so the amazing part about this is I get surgery, right?
Yeah.
Remove the cyst. And 3 days later, my surgeon clears me to go into the woods without running water.
Oh my
Or
God.
electricity, which every day I'm like, that is the what? Like, who does that? And thank you. Like, because this was the most important 3 months of my life, in this healing journey. So anyway, I'll just say, like, yeah, lived in this yurt village. We had no running water. We had one solar panel. We all, cooked, all organic CSA food from local farms. Took 4 college courses, but everything was handwritten and by the book. Sun would go down, we go to sleep, sun comes up, we wake up. I spent probably like, I don't know, 60% of my night sleeping out on the dock, and waking up with the sun. We had a challenge to only bring 100 things with us, during these 3 months. So we had
Is
a
that a tough
sauna.
challenge? Like, I'm thinking 100 things, but like,
Yeah.
I mean, that
Definitely
includes like
stripping.
clothing and
It's like stripping down to the basics. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yep. We had a sauna that wood-fired sauna. That's how we would stay clean. You sauna and jump in the lake. It's funny. I took a shower 3 months after not showering. I felt so much cleaner sauning and jumping in the lake than that shower. Yeah, it's so interesting just how we adjust. But I think what got me through the dark days was realizing all of kind of these seemingly small things that were implemented into routine during the Adirondack semester that I could, and slowly I started to like piece together how I could implement them into my day-to-day life.
Is that why that yurt, like, why was the yurt village created? Do you know what I mean? Like, what was,
it's like an environmental, it's like an environmental program, essentially, like ecological program.
That's outstanding.
Yeah. It's like, it's similar to, it's a form of, not going abroad, but like,
right.
Taking time from school to still learn in a different environment. So.
Which had to be, did it feel soothing for your brain injury and for you?
Oh my gosh. The fog settled. I had one migraine the whole semester, which at the time was unheard of. And
oh, for sure,
for a long time was unheard of. It's just like our world is so overstimulated, and we were in that place, that we traveled by canoe and by foot. Like, we weren't going to, like, we'd have a chore day, on Thursdays, and a pair of people would go to like paddle across the lake, hike up a mile, get in a van, and then like pick up the food and then come back. But other than that, we weren't doing, we weren't exposed to all of the things that we're constantly exposed to in day-to-day life.
So were you guys working on computers?
No electricity. Everything was handwritten.
That's right. You only had a solar panel.
Yeah. My poor mother, right? 3 days after I have surgery,
And
and
now
I
you're out
go
in the
into the woods and I can't communicate with her other than by letter.
Oh my God.
Oh gosh, I think about her now as an adult. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, really. I mean, not only did you have surgery, you have a brain injury. And so I'm just going to send my daughter out there who just had surgery and a brain injury, and good luck. Like, I don't know when I'll
And
talk to you.
trust, just like blind trust, like this, nothing else is working, but
Right.
this, maybe this will. Yeah. And it
So
did. It
I know
totally
when you
changed
said when you
my
came back,
life.
and I know like they do nature therapy on a side note, because I don't know if you've seen, I watched, there was, I think it was on Nat Geo, where they had an Arctic excursion where they're taking vets with PTSD.
No, I
And
haven't.
putting them, I'll have to share it with you, putting
Yes,
them in this
please.
Arctic adventure. It's so drastic
Yep.
because they've figured out that that nature and that type of drastic nature, because they're used to such drastic things, being veterans, could help them regulate their PTSD and actually help them overcome it and being in these situations.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating that, they're sharing their journey and what they're feeling and how they're going through it. And I was like, wow, that's fascinating, because I know even now therapists are starting to take their
Yeah.
clients outside
Yep.
for sessions.
And that's my goal. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. I mean, I've started doing it with my own coaching clients. I have one coming up. I'm like, are you okay to meet at a park? And she's like, yeah, I would love that.
Yep. Yeah.
Because I know for our retreats, they're always out in these nature-esque type places. And it
Yep.
just does. It automatically just calms everything.
Yeah.
So when
Yes.
you left the Yurt village, which I'm very
Yeah.
jealous, by the way,
You
when
should
you
be.
left, did you go into like a shock? Because like, where were you? How far out were you from your brain injury when you went?
I was a year.
Okay, so it was relatively soon after.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. A year and a half. My parents picked me up, and yeah, it was driving an hour in the car and bang, first migraine.
Ooh,
We stopped at a bookstore, which is like historically one of my favorite things to do, is just
mine
to
too. I
peruse.
love a
Yeah, I'm not
bookstore. Yeah, yeah.
surprised. And I could not, I could not read anything. My brain was just like, oh, wait a minute. There's way too much going on. And that's kind of how it spiraled from there. And then, because bad things come in threes, I got Giardia.
What is that?
It's an intestinal parasite. So I lost 30 pounds in 30 days. Super sick.
Where did you get that from?
Theater
The Yurt
semester.
village?
Someone messed up our water, and like I think 3 or 4 of us wound up with Giardia. Yeah. So that also, of course, didn't add to the brain health when you're, can't keep anything in your stomach. So that was really, that was hard.
And how do you overcome that? Like, how do they fix that?
I took a massive antibiotic
Okay.
that then wiped clean my entire digestive system. And so then had to like figure out food allergies after that. And it was all just a mess. I was a mess. It was like a mess. And and of course, just, I've always felt like I can, like, pretty resilient person, like dealing with the physical stuff. I was like, okay, I can deal with this. But man, the emotional and mental impacts of just the really feeling like I had been cured, like in that environment.
And then you get out and you realize I haven't.
Yeah.
And so what happens then emotionally when you realize that?
I tanked. That was those were the dark days, the suicidal days, my mom, crying in my room trying to get me to get some help days. Just which, like looking back, and I've been studying, a lot. I just finished my social work degree in November, and I'm really interested in just like grief and loss and the progression of that. And in some ways, like, there is part of me that thinks that time was really important for me to like really just release a lot of stored up pain, even though I know it was really really, really hard for my parents to see. But I think going through that and then coming out the other side and knowing on the other side that I never wanted to be in that place again, that like I'd done my time, and I needed to like take ownership for myself of like surrendering to what the reality of my new self is. And that was like really important.
Yeah.
To kind of,
When your mom was trying to get you to get help, were you against it? Do you know what I mean? Were you like, oh,
yeah, I
no,
mean, at that point I had gone to a lot of doctors who really I didn't feel respected by. I didn't feel like many were actually at that point like any of them had really provided me with much. I felt really questioned, and the invisible piece of that. And so I was very opposed um to going to therapy, which is ironic in some ways now, working practicing as a therapist. Because
well, I mean, a lot of people are, yeah.
Yeah, because I do think it's such an important component. I think where doctors went wrong with me was saying that needed to be a central component, or like might be the answer,
Mm-hmm.
where by doing that it was like, no, I'm actually experiencing like pretty extreme migraines, vertigo, like it can't stay awake for more than 3 hours. Like this is not just emotional. There's
Right.
also, of course it's also, but like, and I just really wish a doctor had presented it in a way that that made it feel accessible and like as a part of the healing process, and not just like, maybe this will be the thing.
Dude, that's so funny because you and I
you.
had the opposite experience.
Really?
Yeah, they were all physical with me.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And I wanted, at that point, I needed emotional. You know what I mean? And I remember thinking, and they're like, oh, well, we'll test you for anemia and diabetes. And I'm like, I'm not anemic or diabetic. I cracked the toughest part of my skull.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? I need like emotional help here. I'm not okay. And they didn't, I mean, they looked right at me and were like, we don't know what to do with you. If it's not physical, we really don't know what else to do with you.
Yep.
So it's interesting that you and I, right, again, a brain injury, had completely opposite experiences, because I was begging for somebody to help me emotionally.
Yeah.
And they were just doing physical.
Yep.
You know, it was like, and then if they didn't know what to do with that, it's like, we have nothing else. And I'm like, oh my God. And that's where like, Maddie at Love Your Brain finally helped me. And, I realized, okay, like I knew I needed therapy. I wasn't against it. I just couldn't find anybody to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or honor it. It was like, yeah, you don't need that. I'm like, but I do. I'm not okay. So like, what was that turning point for you to finally go, okay, yes, I need therapy?
Well, I'd say this is an interesting question, actually. My foundation in therapy was really just spending time in nature. And kind of like I was a conservation biology major, so I had like this ecological mind, and I think I started to, for myself, connect the spiritual to that. And so I wouldn't say it actually was like through a therapist that I was working with, but just more spending time learning about how to stay connected to the earth, and just the power and feeling the healing of that as part of the process. And then it wasn't for another couple of years before I actually started to go to therapy.
Really?
Yeah, but in the meantime, I was writing a lot. I was publishing a couple of things. I was starting to talk to other people who were, struggling with different. So I felt like I was starting to like pull.
Dabble?
What?
Were you dabbling and like, okay,
dabbling.
like had you gone to Love Your Brain yet?
No, at this point I hadn't.
Okay.
Yeah. No, Love Your Brain was like a pretty transformational experience for me. That was the first community that I had ever been a part of.
It was for me too. I mean, but luckily for me, I mean, I went year 2, which was year 2 for my injury, but year 2 for them.
Yeah, that's right. You were one of the early.
Yeah. Yep. We were the OGs. You know what I mean? They were like, I mean, we look back now and think of some of the stuff they had us do, and we're like, that probably wasn't really good for brain injury survivors. they were doing what they could, you know what I mean? But to
Totally.
your point, I remember walking in there the first time
Mm-hmm.
in Vermont and being scared, not knowing. I had driven when I wasn't supposed to. I didn't care. I
Yeah.
was like, I'm going to get here. These people know what brain injury is. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing Adam in the kitchen area up in Vermont and him hugging me,
Mm-hmm.
and just for the first time, like, I just started crying, like this weight just lifted off of you. And it was like, somebody sees you and all these
Yeah.
other people saw you. And it was like, oh my God, like, I don't, it's very hard to put into words.
Yes.
And I know you felt it when you went,
Mm-hmm.
if you've never experienced it, especially when you feel so alone and so misunderstood,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And it's just so powerful to be with a group of people who you don't need to explain everything to. It's like, I need to go take a nap. I'm just going to go take a nap. Don't need to, everyone knows. All right, she's got to go take a nap.
Well,
Don't
I
need
remember
to
talking to one
explain.
of one of the people. I forget his name, and he was in there all the time, and he was cranky.
Yeah.
And he'd come in, to the thing, and I remember Hannah when I looked at one of my friends, and she goes, and she put her hand on his shoulder, and she goes, "Have you taken a nap?" And he was like,
Totally.
"You know what I mean? No."
Yeah.
Like, go take a nap. And he was like, "Okay," and
Yep.
he just left. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you're right. There's no explanation. It was like everybody really more or less looked out for each other rather than
Hmm.
judged each other.
Exactly. Yeah, there's an attunement there. Like,
Yeah, it's like, and you feel at such ease.
yes.
I remember my friend Kevin, we would have these fun nights and he looked really tired. And his sister,
Hmm.
who was his caregiver, because
Hmm.
for those that don't know, the caregivers could go as well.
Hmm.
And I said, Kevin, are you tired? And he said, yes. And I said, you need to go to bed. And he goes, I know. And I said, do you want me to walk you back to your room? And he said, no, I'll go. He goes, I know. He goes, you're right. And he turned around and he left. And his sister came up to me and she's like, I just told him that 5 minutes ago.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he didn't listen to me. And I looked at her and I go, because he knows I get it.
Yeah. Hmm.
That's why he's listening to me.
Hmm.
He understands I get it.
Hmm.
I go, it's not personal. It's not that he's
Mm-mm.
trying to
Mm-mm.
not take what you're saying. It's just he gets, I get it.
Yeah.
And so I
Hmm.
think to your point, being in a community like that is life changing. Because I remember when you came. I remember that you were like the sweetest soul, but you were just so timid and so like struggling.
Yeah.
And I just
Hmm.
remember hugging, thinking like I was protected. I got very protective of certain. There's a few survivors I remember like that. And it was very protective because at that time I was an ambassador,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
was running workshops when you guys came in, and
Hmm.
it's amazing. So, what do you think was your breakthrough in your own journey where you got into advocacy and support?
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, I mean, after my experience with being a participant with Love Your Brain, I was also an ambassador for a bit, helped facilitate their mindset program, which was awesome. And then the pandemic hit. And at the time, I had been seeing a therapist for a while. And, he was like, Cait, you keep talking about how you want to do this. Like, why don't you just do it? And I was like, what? But I don't but I need to do this and this and this and this. And he's like, no, you just need to just do it. And so I founded my organization like a week later
In true
because
athletic style.
I can just do it. And like I've been thinking about, I was also reading a book the other day about someone who had, a very different form of trauma, but how she realized like during the pandemic that her like complex PTSD was such a superpower because like all of a sudden everyone around her who hasn't experienced what it's like to like have to live in the world with
Yeah.
that, they're freaking out around her and she's like, oh, this is my time, like I got this. And it put into words, like I was like, that's exactly how I felt during the pandemic, which feels like such a privileged thing to say, when it's like
Yeah.
this terrible time. And so many people are struggling in so many ways. And I was just like, oh, this is like, I know this well. Like, I know how to just like care for myself in a little cocoon, like I know how to manage, the just like the wild, uncertain time that is the now. And it just like, I think when a lot of people felt a lot of people around me at least felt so much pressure, and like, you know, I was like, wow, I have some space here to expand. So yeah, I created Concussed. And then 3 months later, I hosted my first retreat for women, very intimate, women with post-concussion syndrome for over 2 years. And that was really special and really, really affirming, because as I love your brain community so much and my experience there. And I think that there's even more nuance to being in that post concussion community. And so it felt really empowering to hold that space. And we developed a writing curriculum, and we had yoga and meditation, and I did some nature-based therapy, and it was lovely. So yeah, I've hosted 2 of those, and then I offer coaching as well through Concussed, which can be either like TBI focused, but also like academic coaching for either people transitioning back into the classroom after an injury or illness, or transitioning back into the job world, or starting something fresh. So that's been great. And then yeah, recently I graduated my social work degree in November, and I'm working for this wonderful woman with Colorado Brain Injury Therapy, working with clients mostly right now in assisted living facilities who have brain injury. So I go into their space and do psychotherapy, and then also working with a group practice that I can walk to. And so really targeting that PCS concussion community as well through that. So it's been just really, really full circle, and so cool to go into those spaces with the knowing of what it is to be one person, you know, who has been through that struggle, but then also to have the clinical skills to be able to you know, navigate both sides of that. It's been really cool. And
How long has it been since like Love Your Brain to now?
Love Your Brain to now.
Like when I first met you, I was trying to think, how long
Like
has it
6
been?
years.
6
Is that
years?
right?
It's been a while.
Yeah, because Love Your Brain was year 7. I just had Day of Darkness, and that was year 13. So
It's a journey,
yeah.
and I think it's important because we all know our brain injury dates, anniversary dates, and I think it's, you know, interesting bringing up the pandemic when you say that, because I thought that too, because I thought now the whole world knows what it's like to have a brain injury, like literally, because people are like, oh my god, I can't go anywhere today. I'm like, this was my world, and all, you know, so for us, we all handled it fairly well because it's like, oh, we got this.
Yeah.
We know how to, even for me when they're, you know, because I lost my taste and smell.
Yep.
Even today, people are like, oh, COVID. I'm like, oh no, brain injury.
Totally. Yeah. I was thinking about you actually when I read that book for that exact reason. Yeah. It's like, oh wow, there are a lot of people now.
You know what I mean? But they're all like, oh, I would like, I've lost that years ago. You know what I mean? It wasn't, and it still hasn't come back because people will ask, and it's like, no, it is what it is. But I think it was our superpower. It was, you know, and that's what made me create TBI Thrivers online and do it, because it was like, okay, nobody had anywhere to go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To connect. And you need that in this space. I think my biggest advocacy for people is if you can find a community.
Yes.
Who understand you, it's life-changing on ways that you would never imagine.
Yep.
You know, if you can get over your own fear of judgment, because the reality is, right, there is that fear. When I walked in, I was like, oh, what am I walking into? But it really was one of the most loving experiences of my entire life.
Me too.
You know, I remember we went back year 2 and everybody was crying.
Yeah.
Because in the beginning, they allowed us to keep coming back because Love Your Brain wanted to see what's working, what isn't. And the only way to do that, right, is to take the guinea pigs and keep bringing them back.
Yep.
You know, and go, okay, what's working? And they had a 3-year wait list at the time.
Yeah.
But they had to get it down, you know? So the next year when we saw each other, like, and it was great for me. And I don't know if you have found this, because I know they eventually weeded that out. Right, where you couldn't keep coming back. But being able to come back on year 2 and see people and have them reflect back how much I had changed, was life-changing for me and my healing, because to your point, I didn't see it.
Yes.
Right. And that may sound weird, and you could probably talk better about that since now you're clinically certified.
I don't know, but
You know what I mean? But because people I know are probably thinking, well, what do you mean you didn't see it? You know what I mean? Like but
for sure.
you don't see it. And the next year when I came back, because I was pretty bad the first year, and the next year people were like, oh my God, you look so bright-eyed and you look so energized. And and I was like, really? Because they're like, yeah, year one you were just like the world was spinning too fast for you.
Yep.
I spent a lot of time in my room and I couldn't be in the loud areas, and I didn't know what the word pen was. I couldn't.
Yep.
And so to have them reflect back just a year later, I could see them and see how much they've changed. I was like, oh, okay, this is working.
Absolutely.
Did you find that true? Like, did you find that?
Yeah, I think the moment that stands out for me is actually not with that community, but with my mom, who looked at me one day and was like, it is probably the most powerful thing I've ever heard. But she looked at me and she said, Cait, you're back. And I was like, what do you mean?
Where'd I go?
Where'd I go? She's like, you're back. Your personality is back. Like you are, and I was, after so many years, to hear that from her. But I think that's such an important point because, like, she was someone who was with me the whole journey and could track in ways that I couldn't. And so much of it is that change of identity and self. And so, at the time when she told me that, I'm still having physical symptoms, but to hear like, oh, you're like, you have, like, I see your eye, like you're in your eyes again.
Right.
Just, yeah, nothing like that. And I think for me, I didn't, I'm trying to think, I didn't come back like to Love Your Brain consecutively. But certainly had that experience with some people, and a lot of the people who I still keep in touch with. And I mean, those who have been on my retreats, we still connect, and it's really just so wonderful when you see people who have stepped into their second self, is what I like to call it.
Oh,
Or their
absolutely. And I
next
love
self.
that. I like that better than the new normal. I never liked the new normal because I don't know.
Me
It's just,
too.
yeah,
Me
it
too.
felt
I
weird.
hate
I
it.
like sucking
Yeah.
self. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, I don't like the normal. But, well, and I remember when you were launching your retreat. And I just remember like being so excited for you. You know what I mean? Like that was huge. And seeing where you had come from, being there in Maine and then seeing what you were now doing, it was like, oh my God, yeah. Like, I knew, I'm like, she's going to change lives.
Thank you, Beckett. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have such a sweet soul about you that people were just naturally drawn, but it can be hard because, and this is something I want to get your perspective on is, how do you envision the future of concussion management and support evolving in terms of like community engagement and empowerment, right? Because you did see a separation of like, you're a TBI versus you're a concussion, or right, like so when I look at originally Love Your Brain, we had people in there with strokes. We had people in there for meningitis, which they don't have really anymore, and I get why that changed, but it all leads to the same thing. So how do you see that moving forward?
Yeah, with concussion in particular, I think we have so much work to do. And I feel like we're starting to make a little bit of progress. And part of that, unfortunately, is because of these NFL players, who are in their lives having significant behavioral changes. Unfortunately, we can only diagnose CTE after you've died, but we're finally starting to put two and two together there around like multiple head traumas is going to physically impact the brain. I think that's something that's really hard with concussion, is like you can't just do a scan and identify that you have a concussion. There are some advanced technologies that can identify some markers, but they're not available in our medical model to the average human. I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of management within schools and within athletic mindset. I come back to the story a lot for myself, and my dad's a college hockey coach, and we've had a lot of conversations about this. I was coaching hockey. This was like 6 years after my concussion, I'd say. right? I had gone through this experience myself.
Right.
I remember this one day, I see this girl hit the boards a little funny. I'm like, I know I need to pull her. But that athletic mindset is so ingrained in me that I had to tell myself, you need to pull her to do concussion protocol, after everything I've been through.
Yeah.
But just like that mindset that training that athletes have to push and push and push
Regardless.
through, we need to break that. And I think a lot of, and that's not on that. I don't think that is on the person who gets hit. I think
Right.
that's on teammates. I think it's on coaches to say, hey, like we're going to take, you're out for a little bit of time instead
Right.
of this, being a lifetime impact or being the reason that you no longer live. I think there's just so much education that we need around, also just around how to support people who are going through something that you don't understand. And it's the same, there's so many similarities in, like, grief and loss of kids who have lost a parent, but just like how do we teach our young people how to be with and be there for, without feeling the need to like level up in our trauma. I think that's like, and that's something that I hear all the time from clients, is just that, like, people around me they are not willing to sit and slow down enough to be with me, and instead either write me off or, have some experience that they feel that they need to bring up to say, oh, I've experienced something like this,
Right.
And one of the theories around that is, like, the reason that happens is, like, oh, all of a sudden there's a space for someone to share something that we don't have space for otherwise. Like, how do we just create more space for everyone?
Which you would think would be easy, right? You know what I mean?
You would think. Yeah, but
it's not. And I get that, because to your point, which was great, this week I had my nephew's friend
yep
ask me if he could interview me for a senior project he was doing, and his senior project was on mental health.
Yep.
And he wanted to bring me and interview me as an expert to see what did I think, what were my, insights. He had some things he wanted to share. And it was a fascinating conversation, because here's this young man, getting ready to graduate high school, and he was sharing with me about how a student there was struggling.
Yep.
Real tough life, family, friends. And he said, nobody really will talk to him. Here at our school, because he goes to a private school, but he's like, we're supposed to be this brotherhood. But everybody's making fun of him because he's weird or he's odd or he's, you know what I mean? He goes, that has a rough life. He goes, so I reached out to him and I just said, listen, you don't have to talk to me if you don't want to, but I'm here as a friend. If you need somebody to talk to. And he goes, just telling him that changed everything for him.
Yep.
He was so appreciative that I just took, like you said, the time and space to do that. And so he had asked me, which was interesting, which I love that he was even thinking about it, right? Because their generation, yes. I mean, you talk about brain injury, I think I saw a statistic the other day that their generation, it has the worst anxiety and depression of any generation.
Yep. We're in a mental health crisis.
Right. A mental health crisis
right now.
And
yes.
Exactly. And I told him, I'm like, you are the future. So the fact that you're seeing this is pivotal. And he said, but what do I do with that kid? And I said, what if you created an after school group of just, if you don't have any friends, we can meet. And his mind just went like, and he's like, I could do that. I said, yeah. Like no expectations, no judgment. But if you feel like you don't have any friend or you want to save space, we'll be here. Come as you are.
Yeah.
I'm like, think how life-changing that would be, and some kids might struggle to show up, right? The fear and all that. I said, but you reached out to him, you've changed his life. Like just creating that space
yeah,
to talk and do those things would change something. And he was like, oh my God, I'm gonna see if I can do that. Like, you're right. And then it could help all these other things that he was listing off of, like vaping, he said was a big thing in his school. And he's like, I want to talk about that. It's all mental health. And I said, I get it. So it was fascinating. So to your point, I think exactly how do we create the space, and more so, how do we teach the youth,
Yeah.
to create that space and honor each other and look at and get off their phones.
Yeah, and I love that he reached out. It's like they can be micro moments too, like
Yes.
they could be micro moments or to the range of support groups and retreats, but it doesn't have to be like,
It doesn't have to be huge. And that's
it's
what I
like
said to
how
him. I'm
to,
like,
yeah, it's all
the
about
simple fact that
connection.
you reached out to him probably changed
Exactly.
his life.
Yes.
And that's a micro moment.
Yes. Yeah.
It really is that simple. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
these huge retreats or support groups, and I was just thinking, because he was, looking for bigger examples and things. He had great ideas, but
Yeah.
I said it starts with this. The micro moments create smaller micro moments, which create a bigger ripple effect.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And so do you think eventually, we're going to keep TBI and concussion separate? Or do you think, like this woman said, her son was diagnosed with a TBI concussion?
Yeah. I mean, I think, well, they're not separate. And that's
No, I don't understand. I've never understood really, and I had a TBI. I didn't have a concussion, but I'm like, but they're the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And there are differences, but yeah. And I think that's a great question. I don't know.
I just wondered your opinion. Yeah, I don't know, because I was surprised that she said that's what they diagnosed him, and that was in Arizona. And she said they said he has a TBI concussion, and I went, huh.
I appreciate that because that's where language is so important. Just the matching of those two opens up resources. It opens up Googleable.
Yes.
Googleable, if that's like a word.
It's a word now.
Okay, Googleable things.
Right.
Like it's the same. It's like you type in post-concussion syndrome into like psychology today, you don't find anything. It's important to like have those delineations, and it's all under the realm of TBI. I think too, it's like it just comes back to like the human nature of wanting to put things into boxes, and like where the reality,
I think we box things too much.
I completely agree, because the reality of a concussion, whether it's a mild concussion or a major severe TBI, is like still, no matter whether you're characterizing that, no brain injury is the same.
So, and I didn't feel like, I know in Love Your Brain, like, right, when you were there, I was there, and I related to you just as well as I'm sure you related to me. Do you know what I mean? There was no difference. I didn't, or with any of the other participants that had concussions versus TBIs, we were all going through very similar things.
Yes, but we live in a society that categorizes us differently.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and for some ways, which I didn't care for, is that I feel like if you get concussion, it's not as bad.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like there's this
for sure
essence, like, oh, well, you had a concussion, you didn't have a TBI. But I'm like, but the end result's the same. But we're still both having brain fog. We're still both struggling with memory. We're still both dealing with energy issues. We're still like everything on paper was. You wouldn't know if I just listed the symptoms, whether it was a concussion or a TBI.
Totally. Yeah.
And I'm not. We're obviously not talking about extremes where you got to learn to walk,
for sure. Yes.
all that. But
yes.
You
and me.
Right. For basic, most average TBIs and concussions, they're very similar.
Yep.
So to me, it's like, why are we separating them?
Yeah. Yeah. And then how do we, because we're separating them in this medical model, like how do we make sure that we're resourcing people who are being
to get the treatment they need? So I know we can't solve it all right now, but I appreciate your insight into that. And one question I ask everybody who comes on the podcast, and everybody always goes, whoa. So I'm just prompting you.
Okay, great.
It's really not that bad, I promise you. But in a world constantly seeking answers, what's the most powerful question you've asked yourself that led to a profound shift in your perspective or your life direction? Yeah, I know. It's the same answer I get all the time.
I know.
Like, damn, I got to think about this. So it's like,
I know, because I know I have a good answer. I'm just not sure I'll be able to come up with it right now. What I know to be true is that one of the most important things for me has been, how do I surround myself with people who live authentically, create space for others, and also want to continue learning and growing. And I think that is probably, maybe the question is, how do I create space so that I surround myself with people who do those things? But I also think that I want to also recognize that, like, for me, the connection to the natural world was such an important part of my healing process that so often involved no other human.
Yeah.
And so part of I think my goal moving forward is, like, how do I create space for others to also feel that, so that when they're surrounded by, so that people don't feel alone.
Yeah.
You're never alone when you're connected in that way. So I could definitely come up with a more articulate way to say all of
No,
that,
that's
but
beautiful.
that feels,
No,
those are
that was
two things that really resonate for me, especially in my decision to, like, kind of want to combine my career with
mm-hmm.
with or have a career that evolves from a life experience that was really challenging, but that allowed me to grow in ways I never would have expected.
Nature is very healing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if people like just your yard, you know what I mean? If you just
Mm-hmm.
go out in your backyard, wherever you are, and literally just stand there in bare feet,
Mm-hmm.
you'll feel it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a beautiful question. I think you answered it perfectly. So I appreciate you for answering it the way you did. So how can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, awesome. I have a website called Concussed Cait. Concussed was taken. And I have an Instagram account that I'm not a frequent flyer on it, but I've recently committed to one of my, like, go-to self-care things is collaging. And I love collaging because it's like, it works with my hands, but it can also kind of turn my brain off because it's like images are already generated,
Right.
there's like a little bit less thinking involved in, in crafting words. And so I've committed recently to only collaging on my Instagram page, so that I'm combining
That's a good
combining
idea.
work and play, because I just, like, am not one to stay up to speed with that. So I don't post that often. I don't know how the algorithm's going to help me, but it's there. And when I post, it's thoughtful and intentional. So I appreciate any follows through that. And then
Okay.
I also just want to name that if anyone is living in Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
so I do coaching through Concussed, but then if anyone's living in Colorado, I'm also working as a psychotherapist through iSeek therapy, and then also through Colorado Brain Injury Therapy. And you can find both of those online as well. So,
And I, as always, will list all these links in the description
thank
for
you.
everybody to connect with her. Cait, thank you, my friend, for being on here.
Thank you so much, Beckett. This was
I
really
appreciate you
lovely.
so much.
I really
Everybody else,
appreciate you too.
stay curious, stay empowered, and keep shining your unique light. We'll see you on the next one.